I still hear his voice echoing in that grand Chicago townhouse, cold and sharp like broken glass. Did someone call the maid? It hit me harder than when my son, standing beside me, began clapping, mocking, triumphant. The sound still haunts my dreams, even now. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. That evening started like any other in my small apartment on Chicago's South Side. I woke up exhausted, the bitter smoke from my neighbor's barbecue drifting through my thin walls. The streets outside smelled of rain and street food, the familiar sounds of the city mixing with my own shallow breathing. I had taken my blood pressure medication, as I did every morning, staring at the collection of pill bottles on my kitchen counter. 7 bottles. 7 reminders of how my body was failing me, just like everything else seemed to be. I remember standing in front of my small bedroom mirror, adjusting my faded floral dress. It was the nicest thing I owned, purchased 3 years ago from a discount store on Madison Street. The fabric had lost its vibrancy, much like I felt I had lost mine. But I wore it anyway because Emily, my daughter-in-law, had invited me to her birthday party. Her invitation came through a text message, brief and cold. Party tonight, 7 p.m. Don't bring anything. Even the invitation felt like an afterthought, but I clung to it like a lifeline. Family was supposed to be everything, wasn't it? I tucked a worn photograph into my small purse, the 3 of us from happier times. Michael, my son, had his arm around both Emily and me. We were smiling, genuinely smiling. His eyes held warmth then, before they turned distant. Before Emily's influence crept in like winter fog, chilling everything it touched. I carried that photo everywhere, a talisman against the growing coldness I felt from my own flesh and blood. The bus ride to Lincoln Park took 45 minutes. I watched the city blur past the smudged windows. Familiar landmarks that once brought me comfort now feeling like silent witnesses to my growing isolation. The Willis Tower stood tall in the distance, unwavering and strong. I wished I could borrow some of that strength, just enough to make it through another family gathering where I felt more like an intruder than a beloved mother and grandmother. Their townhouse was beautiful. I'll give them that. Red brick facade with ivy climbing the walls, gas lanterns flickering beside a mahogany door that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The neighborhood screamed wealth and success, manicured lawns, luxury cars lining the street. The kind of life I never could have imagined for my son when I was raising him alone in our cramped 2-bedroom apartment. I rang the doorbell, my arthritic fingers trembling slightly. Not from the cold, but from anticipation mixed with dread. This feeling had become too familiar lately. This knot in my stomach whenever I had to interact with my own family. Through the frosted glass, I could see shapes moving, hear laughter and conversation flowing like music I wasn't invited to join. Emily opened the door, and her smile was perfectly polished, just like her appearance. Designer dress, professional makeup, hair styled by someone who charged more for a cut than I spent on groceries in a month. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to recognize. Pleasant on the surface, but with undertones of barely concealed annoyance. "You made it." I stepped inside, immediately struck by the grandeur. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors. The living room opened into a space larger than my entire apartment, filled with well-dressed people holding wine glasses and making sophisticated conversation. I felt my shoulders hunch instinctively, trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable. The party was in full swing. Designer handbags casually dropped on Italian leather furniture. Conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. These were Emily's people. Investment bankers, real estate developers, social climbers who measured worth in dollar signs and square footage. I recognized a few faces from previous gatherings, people who looked through me like I was made of glass. Michael appeared from the kitchen, whiskey in hand, his face flushed with alcohol and animated conversation. When he saw me, that familiar shadow crossed his features. Not displeasure exactly, but something close to it. Embarrassment, maybe. As if my presence somehow diminished him in front of his wife's successful friends. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying across the room louder than necessary. "I didn't think you were coming." The conversations around us seemed to pause, subtle but noticeable. Eyes turned in our direction, curious and assessing. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, that familiar shame that came with being the outsider in my own son's life. But I forced a smile. The same smile I'd perfected over years of swallowing hurt and disappointment. "Emily invited me," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the ambient noise. That's when Emily's brother, Richard, appeared beside Michael. Richard was cut from the same cloth as his sister. Expensive suit, Swiss watch, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about keeping the lights on. He looked at me with undisguised disdain, his eyes traveling from my faded dress to my worn shoes, cataloging every visible sign of my modest circumstances. And then he said it. Those words that would echo in my mind for months to come. "Did someone call the maid?" The room didn't fall silent dramatically. Life isn't like the movies. Instead, there was a ripple of uncomfortable laughter, the kind that cruel people use to mask their cruelty as humor. But what happened next was worse than the initial insult. What happened next was the sound that would haunt me forever. My son began clapping. Not the slow, sarcastic clap of disapproval. No, this was genuine applause, as if Richard had delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. My own son, the boy I had raised alone, the child I had sacrificed everything for, was applauding someone who had just humiliated his mother in front of a room full of strangers. I stood there frozen, feeling every eye in the room upon me. Some faces showed embarrassment for me. Others barely concealed amusement. A few people looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing such naked cruelty. But my son kept clapping, kept smiling, kept showing me exactly where I stood in his hierarchy of loyalty. The sound of his hands coming together was like gunshots to my heart. Each clap was a betrayal, a rejection of every sacrifice I had ever made for him. Every double shift I had worked to pay for his school clothes. Every Christmas present I had saved months to buy. Every time I had gone without so he could have what he needed. All of it reduced to this moment of public humiliation. Emily's face showed a flash of something, guilt maybe, or concern about how this looked to her guests. But she didn't speak up, didn't defend me, didn't even have the common decency to look embarrassed by her brother's behavior or her husband's response to it. I wanted to leave immediately, to rush out of that beautiful house with its ugly people and never look back. But something kept me rooted to that spot. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the part of me that still hoped this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding that would be corrected with apologies and awkward laughter. Instead, Richard continued his performance. "I mean, look at that dress," he said, gesturing at me like I was an exhibit in a museum. Very authentic cleaning lady chic. More laughter, more clapping from my son, more pieces of my heart breaking and scattering across those pristine hardwood floors. I think about that moment often, even now. How completely alone I felt while surrounded by people. How the woman who had given birth to one of the people laughing at me might as well have been invisible. The air in that room felt thick, suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been replaced with the poison of their casual cruelty. Have you ever experienced a moment like that? A time when the people who are supposed to love you most made you feel like you deserved their contempt. The feeling stays with you, long after the laughter fades. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night was just the culmination of years of smaller hurts, Tiny cuts that had been bleeding me dry for so long I had almost forgotten what it felt like to not be in pain. Let me tell you about the years that led to that moment. The history of sacrifices that made his betrayal so complete, so devastating. Because understanding where I came from is the only way to understand how far I had to fall before I could learn to rise again. I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant with Michael. His father, Robert, was 22 and full of promises about the future we would build together. We lived in a studio apartment in Wicker Park, back when it was still rough around the edges, before the gentrification turned it into another playground for the wealthy. Robert had dreams of becoming a musician. He spent his days writing songs and his nights playing in dive bars for audiences of 5 or 6 people who were more interested in their drinks than his music. I worked as a waitress at a diner on North Avenue, my feet swelling in cheap shoes, my back aching from carrying heavy trays. But I believed in his dreams because I loved him, and love makes you stupid sometimes. When Michael was born, Robert held him for maybe 5 minutes before handing him back to me with the look of someone who had just realized the magnitude of what he'd gotten himself into. Babies are expensive. They cry at night. They need things that cost money we didn't have. Dreams of musical stardom don't pay for diapers and formula. He left when Michael was 6 months old. Not dramatically, not with a big fight or tearful goodbye. He just started coming home later and later until one day he didn't come home at all. I found a note on our rickety kitchen table. 4 sentences about how he wasn't ready to be a father, how he needed to find himself, how maybe someday we could try again. I never heard from him again. So there I was, 19 years old with a baby, a pile of bills, and the kind of crushing responsibility that ages you overnight. I had to grow up fast. Learned to be both mother and father to a boy who would grow up asking why his daddy didn't love him enough to stay. I took a second job cleaning office buildings downtown. After my shift at the diner ended at 3, I would race home to my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched Michael for $5 an hour I could barely afford. Then I would take 2 buses to the Loop and clean offices until midnight, my hands raw from industrial cleaning supplies, my body exhausted beyond measure. Michael was a good baby, thank God. He slept through most nights, rarely cried, seemed to understand somehow that his mama was doing her best with what little she had. When he got older and started asking about his father, I told him Daddy was working far away, but loved him very much. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but what else could I say? That his father had decided being a parent was too hard and walked away without looking back. I remember Michael's 3rd birthday. I had saved for months to buy him a bicycle from the Salvation Army thrift store. It was rusty and the paint was chipped, but I spent hours with steel wool and spray paint, making it look as close to new as I could manage. When I presented it to him that morning, his face lit up like Christmas morning. He threw his arms around my neck and said, "You're the best mama in the whole world." Those words sustained me through years of exhaustion and worry. They carried me through double shifts and empty refrigerators, through nights when I cried quietly in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear, through the crushing loneliness of raising a child alone while watching other families that seemed so effortlessly complete. When Michael started school, I thought things might get easier. I was wrong. School meant expenses I hadn't anticipated. Field trips, school supplies, new clothes when he outgrew the old ones. It meant conferences with teachers and homework help and all the things that 2-parent families seem to manage so easily. I dropped out of community college where I had been taking night classes in art therapy. The dream of maybe helping other people heal through creativity had to be sacrificed on the altar of immediate necessity. My textbooks went to a used bookstore for $30 that bought groceries for a week. But I told myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every abandoned dream, every night I fell into bed so exhausted I could barely pull the covers over myself. It was all worth it because I was building something. I was raising a son who would grow up knowing he was loved, who would never doubt that someone in this world thought he hung the moon. Michael was a smart boy, curious about everything. He brought home good grades and drawings he'd made in art class, stories about his friends and teachers that made me laugh despite my exhaustion. He was affectionate and thoughtful, the kind of child who noticed when I looked tired and would pat my hand with his small one. "Are you okay, Mama?" he would ask, his brown eyes full of concern that seemed too mature for his age. "I'm fine, baby," I would always answer. "Mama's just a little tired." When he was 10, I met a man at the diner where I worked. His name was James, and he was kind to me in a way I had forgotten was possible. He fixed my leaky kitchen sink and took Michael to baseball games, and for a brief, shining moment, I thought maybe we could be a real family. It lasted 8 months. James left when he realized how much of my attention and resources would always belong to Michael first. "I can't compete with that kid," he said on his way out the door. "He'll always come first with you." He said it like it was a character flaw, like loving my son completely was somehow wrong. But he was right about one thing. Michael would always come first. That's what being a mother meant to me. That's what love looked like in our small, struggling household. After James left, Michael seemed to understand without being told that it would be just the two of us again. He stopped asking about getting a stepdad and started helping more around the house. He learned to make simple meals and do his own laundry, taking on responsibilities that other children his age never had to consider. "We're a good team, aren't we, Mama?" he said one evening as we cleaned dishes together in our tiny kitchen. "The best team," I agreed, ruffling his hair. High school brought new challenges. Michael wanted to play football, but the equipment and fees were beyond my budget. He wanted to go to homecoming, but formal wear cost money I didn't have. I took on extra cleaning jobs, worked myself to exhaustion, but somehow always managed to find a way. A used suit from Goodwill that I tailored myself. Cleats from a garage sale that I cleaned until they looked almost new. He never complained, never made me feel bad about what we couldn't afford. Instead, he seemed grateful for everything I managed to provide. He hugged me often and told his friends I was the hardest working person he knew. When he graduated valedictorian, his speech mentioned me by name, thanking his mother for sacrificing everything to give him a chance at a better life. I cried so hard during that speech that Mrs. Chen had to pass me tissues. College was another mountain to climb. Michael was smart enough for scholarships, but they didn't cover everything. I refinanced my small condo, taking out equity I couldn't really afford to lose. I picked up a third job doing data entry at night, typing until my fingers cramped, my eyes burning from staring at computer screens. But I did it gladly because Michael was going to be the first person in our family to graduate from college. He was going to have opportunities I never had, a future that stretched beyond paycheck to paycheck survival. He studied business and economics at Northwestern, commuting from home to save on housing costs. Every morning, I made him breakfast and sent him off with a lunch I had packed the night before. Every evening he came home and told me about his classes, his professors, the internships he was applying for. "I'm going to take care of you someday, Mama," he would say. "I'm going to buy you a big house and you'll never have to work again." I believed him completely. It was during his junior year that he met Emily at a networking event downtown. She was studying at University of Chicago, came from a family with old money and older expectations. Her parents owned property throughout the city, had investment portfolios that apparently generated more in dividends than I made in a year of working multiple jobs. Emily was beautiful in a way I had never been, even in my youth. Polished and confident, with the kind of ease that comes from never having to worry about basic necessities. She spoke about her future in terms of stock options and career advancement, using words I had to look up later to understand. Michael was smitten immediately. He started spending more time getting ready in the mornings, asked me to buy him nicer clothes, began talking about restaurants and cultural events I had never heard of. When he brought Emily home for dinner, I cooked for 3 days straight, trying to prepare a meal that would impress someone who had grown up with catered parties and private chefs. Emily was polite but distant during that first dinner. She complimented my cooking with the kind of faint praise that somehow managed to sound condescending. She asked about my work with the curiosity of someone examining an interesting specimen. When Michael walked her to her car afterward, I watched from the kitchen window as she spoke animatedly about something that made them both laugh. I had the strangest feeling that I was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. As their relationship deepened, I saw Michael less and less. He would come home late from dates, sleeping until noon on weekends before rushing out to meet Emily and her friends for brunches and gallery openings I was never invited to. When I asked about his day, his answers became shorter, less detailed. "How was the art museum?" I might ask. "Fine," he would reply, already checking his phone for messages. The boy who had once told me everything was becoming a stranger, shaped by influences I couldn't compete with and didn't fully understand. When Michael graduated, Emily's parents threw a party at their country club in Winnetka. I was invited, technically, but it was clear from the moment I arrived that I was out of place. The other guests were doctors and lawyers, executives and entrepreneurs. They spoke casually about their second homes and European vacations while I stood by the punch bowl in my discount store dress, trying to look like I belonged. Emily's mother, Patricia, was gracious in the way that wealthy women are trained to be. She asked about my work with the kind of polite interest that somehow managed to make it clear that she considered my answers quaint, but ultimately irrelevant. When I mentioned how proud I was of Michael's accomplishments, she smiled and said, "Yes, Emily has been such a good influence on him." As if I hadn't been the one who shaped him from birth, who had sacrificed everything to give him the foundation that made his success possible. Michael and Emily got engaged 6 months after graduation. The ring cost more than I made in a year, and Emily made sure everyone knew it. The engagement party was another country club affair, full of people who looked at me with barely concealed pity when Michael introduced me as my mother, not my amazing mother who raised me alone, or the woman who sacrificed everything for me. Just my mother, as if I was a minor character in the story of his life. The wedding was planned with military precision by Emily's mother and a professional coordinator who cost more than most people's cars. I was consulted on exactly nothing. My opinions were not sought, my preferences not considered. I was told when to arrive, where to sit, what color dress would photograph well with the rest of the family. I offered to help pay for something, anything, but Patricia waved away my offer with a laugh that wasn't entirely kind. "Oh, Margaret, don't worry about that. We have it covered." The implication was clear. Your contribution wouldn't be significant enough to matter anyway. I spent Michael's wedding day sitting at a table with distant relatives I didn't know, watching my son dance with his new wife while her family beamed with pride and accomplishment. During the father-daughter dance, Emily's father gave a speech about gaining a son, about how Michael was exactly the kind of man he had hoped his daughter would marry. No one mentioned the mother who had raised that man from nothing. After the honeymoon, Michael and Emily moved into their first apartment together, a luxury high-rise in River North with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman who wore white gloves. Emily's parents had helped with the down payment as a wedding gift, a gesture of generosity that I couldn't begin to match. I visited exactly once. Emily gave me a tour that felt more like a real estate showing, pointing out expensive features and design elements with the enthusiasm of someone who had never had to calculate whether they could afford to eat out this week. The kitchen had granite countertops and professional-grade appliances that cost more than my yearly grocery budget. "It's beautiful," I said, because it was true and because I didn't know what else to say. "Thank you," Emily replied, as if she had created it all herself instead of simply accepting it as a gift from parents who could afford such gestures. That was when the real distance began. Michael's visits became less frequent, his phone calls shorter and more perfunctory. When I did see him, he seemed different, more polished, more sophisticated, but also somehow smaller. The boy who had once hugged me fiercely and called me his best friend was being replaced by a man who seemed vaguely embarrassed by his humble origins. Emily was pregnant within a year of the wedding. When she went into early labor, I rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding with excitement and terror. But when I arrived, I found that visiting hours were being strictly controlled. Emily's parents were already there, established in the family waiting area like they owned it. "Oh, Margaret," Patricia said when she saw me. "How nice of you to come. I'm sure Michael will be out to see you when things settle down." I waited for 6 hours in that sterile waiting room, watching Emily's family go in and out of the maternity ward, while I sat with other people's discarded magazines and cold coffee from a vending machine. When Michael finally appeared, he looked exhausted and overwhelmed. "Mom," he said, and for a moment he sounded like my little boy again. "We had a scare, but everything's okay now. The baby's perfect." "Can I see him?" I asked. Michael's face shifted slightly, the warmth fading back into that polite distance I was learning to recognize. "Emily's pretty tired right now. Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. By the time I finally met my first grandchild, little David, he was already 6 weeks old, and Emily had established a routine that didn't include unscheduled visits from grandmothers who worked cleaning jobs and lived in modest apartments on the South Side. But David was beautiful, perfect. When I held him for the first time, he looked up at me with Michael's eyes, and I fell in love all over again. This tiny person was part of me, part of the son I had raised, part of our family's continuing story. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to babysit and help with feedings and be the kind of grandmother who spoils her grandchildren with love and attention. But Emily had her own ideas about child rearing, most of them borrowed from expensive parenting books and exclusive mommy groups. When I offered to watch David so they could go out to dinner, Emily laughed that same, not quite kind laugh I was learning to dread. "Oh, Margaret, that's sweet, but we have a nanny for that sort of thing." A nanny? They had hired a stranger to care for their child, rather than accept free help from the baby's grandmother. The nanny was young and pretty, and held a degree in early childhood development from some prestigious East Coast college. She was paid more per month than I made in 3 months of cleaning offices and caring for other people's messes. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself they were just being careful, that new parents naturally want the best for their children. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't considered qualified to care for my own grandchild because I didn't have the right credentials, the right background, the right social status. Money became another source of tension, though it was always discussed in euphemisms and implications rather than direct requests. Michael would mention casually how expensive childcare was, how much the mortgage cost on their new house in Lincoln Park, how Emily's maternity leave was unpaid and stretching their budget. I started sending checks. Not large amounts, I couldn't afford large amounts, but whatever I could spare from my already tight budget. $50 here, $100 there. Money that should have gone toward my own retirement savings or necessary home repairs instead went to help support a lifestyle I could never hope to achieve myself. "You don't have to do this, Mom," Michael would say when the checks arrived. But he always cashed them. Emily never thanked me directly for the money. Instead, she would post pictures on social media of expensive purchases, designer baby clothes, organic foods, professional photography sessions, without ever acknowledging where the extra funds had come from. To her friends and family, it must have looked like she and Michael were managing their upscale lifestyle entirely on their own merit. The second grandchild, Sarah, arrived 2 years later. This time, I wasn't even notified when Emily went into labor. I found out about my granddaughter's birth through a Facebook post, complete with professional photos that had somehow been taken at the hospital within hours of delivery. When I called to congratulate them, Michael sounded surprised to hear from me. "Oh, Mom, sorry. Everything happened so fast and Emily was so tired afterward. We meant to call." But they had found time to notify everyone else, to arrange for professional photography, to post updates on social media that reached hundreds of people before reaching the baby's only living grandmother. That's when I started to understand that my exclusion wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, systematic, carefully orchestrated to keep me at a distance while maintaining the appearance of normal family relationships. The children grew older, and I remained a peripheral figure in their lives. I was invited to birthday parties but seated at tables with other distant relatives. I was included in holiday gatherings but given assignments like bringing paper plates or cleaning up afterward, while Emily's mother was asked to contribute wine and flowers. My gifts were always practical: clothes the children needed, educational toys, savings bonds for their college funds. Emily's parents gave elaborate presents that delighted the children and impressed the other adults. Remote-controlled helicopters, designer dollhouses, trips to Disney World that I could never afford to match. I began to feel like I was competing in a contest I couldn't win, trying to prove my love through gestures that would always fall short of what wealthier relatives could provide. The worst part wasn't the exclusion itself. It was watching my son participate in it. The boy who had once defended me against anyone who dared criticize his single mother now stood silent while his wife's family treated me like an unwelcome obligation. During one Christmas dinner at Emily's parents' house, her brother Richard made a joke about charity cases while looking directly at me. The whole table laughed except for me and little Sarah, who was too young to understand what was happening. Michael sat right there, saw the whole thing, and said nothing. After dinner, I cornered him in the hallway. "Michael, did you hear what Richard said?" My son looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he used to do when he was little and had been caught in a lie. "Mom, he was just joking around. You know how Richard is." "I know exactly how Richard is," I said. "The question is, do you know how your mother is? Do you remember that I raised you? That I worked 3 jobs to give you what you needed? That I sacrificed everything?" Michael's face hardened slightly, taking on an expression I didn't recognize. "Mom, you can't keep throwing that in my face forever. I'm grateful for what you did, but that was your choice. I didn't ask you to sacrifice anything." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Your choice. As if loving him, caring for him, putting his needs first had been some kind of optional decision I had made for my own benefit, rather than an expression of the deepest love a parent can feel. I went home that night and cried until my ribs ached. Not just for the cruel words, but for the realization that the son I had raised was disappearing, being replaced by someone who saw my sacrifices as burdens rather than gifts. But I kept trying. I kept showing up, kept sending money I couldn't afford, kept swallowing hurt and disappointment because I believed that family was everything. I believed that love was supposed to be unconditional, that being a mother meant accepting whatever scraps of affection your children were willing to offer. I was wrong about so many things. The financial demands increased over the years. Michael and Emily upgraded to a larger house, then a vacation property in Wisconsin. Emily quit her job to focus on being a full-time mother, which was admirable but expensive. Private schools, music lessons, soccer leagues, summer camps. The children's activities cost more than my monthly income. And somehow, I was expected to contribute. Not asked directly. Emily was too sophisticated for such crude requests. Instead, there would be casual mentions of financial stress, pointed comments about how expensive everything was, suggestions that perhaps I could help with specific costs. I took out a second mortgage on my small condo to pay for David's private kindergarten tuition. I canceled my health insurance temporarily to cover Sarah's violin lessons. I ate ramen noodles for weeks to send money for Emily's sister's wedding gift, because apparently it needed to be generous enough to reflect well on the entire family. My retirement savings dwindled to almost nothing. The little condo I had worked so hard to buy outright was now encumbered with debt I wasn't sure I could repay. But every time I considered saying no, I thought about my grandchildren growing up thinking their grandmother didn't care enough to help. The emotional manipulation was subtle but constant. When I couldn't afford to contribute to some expense or another, Emily would sigh and say things like, "I guess we'll have to tell the children that Grandma can't help with this," as if my financial limitations were a personal failing rather than the natural result of a lifetime spent in service jobs. Michael began to echo Emily's attitudes, though I don't think he realized it. He started making comments about my appearance, my home, my lifestyle that sounded like observations but felt like criticisms. "Mom, you should really update your wardrobe. Emily knows some great places to shop. This neighborhood is getting kind of rough, isn't it? Maybe you should think about moving somewhere safer." Safer meant more expensive. Better clothes meant designer labels. Everything they suggested required money I didn't have. But if I didn't follow their advice, it was treated as evidence of stubbornness rather than financial reality. I started working extra hours to afford the improvements they suggested. My arthritis worsened from the additional cleaning work. My blood pressure spiked from stress and exhaustion. But I pushed through because I thought it would help me fit better into their world. It never did. No matter what I wore or how I styled my hair or which conversation topics I tried to master, I remained fundamentally different from Emily's family and friends. I was the woman who cleaned offices instead of owning them, who worried about utility bills instead of investment portfolios, who shopped at discount stores instead of boutiques. The third grandchild, Leah, was born when I was 65 and finally eligible for Social Security. By then, the pattern was well established. I found out about her birth through social media, was invited to meet her at their convenience, and was expected to contribute financially despite having even less income than before. But Leah was different from her siblings somehow. Maybe it was timing, maybe it was personality, but she seemed to see me differently than the others did. She reached for me when I held her, smiled at the sound of my voice, seemed genuinely happy to see me during my brief, supervised visits. As she grew older, Leah became my lifeline to the family. She was the one who hugged me when I arrived and cried when I left. She asked about my home, wanted to know about my childhood, listened with genuine interest when I told her stories about raising her father. "Daddy was really poor when he was little?" she asked once, her 7-year-old eyes wide with curiosity. "We didn't have much money," I corrected gently, "but we were rich in love." She seemed to understand that distinction in a way her parents had forgotten. But even Leah couldn't protect me from the growing coldness that characterized most of my interactions with Michael and Emily. Birthday invitations came later and later. Christmas visits became shorter and more formal, and my attempts at conversation were met with polite but distant responses. I felt like I was slowly disappearing from their lives, becoming less relevant and more burdensome with each passing month. The woman who had once been the center of Michael's world was now barely a footnote in his story. That's the context you need to understand what happened at Emily's birthday party. That's the foundation of hurt and disappointment and systematic exclusion that made Richard's cruel joke and Michael's applause so devastating. I had been enduring smaller humiliations for years, death by 1,000 cuts, each one individually survivable but collectively life-threatening. I had been financing my own marginalization, paying for the privilege of being treated like a second-class family member. The night of the party, I stood in that beautiful townhouse surrounded by successful people who saw me as a curiosity at best and an embarrassment at worst, watching my son laugh at a joke made at my expense, and I finally understood that all my sacrifices had been for nothing. The boy I had raised to be grateful and kind had become a man who would applaud someone for publicly humiliating his mother. The family I had bankrupted myself trying to support saw me as a burden rather than a blessing. The love I had poured out unconditionally for decades was being returned with contempt and mockery. But understanding and accepting are two different things. It would take months more of smaller betrayals and cruel revelations before I found the strength to stop participating in my own destruction. Are you starting to see the pattern? Can you recognize the slow erosion of dignity that happens when you love people more than they love you back? The weeks following Emily's birthday party were among the darkest of my life. I kept replaying that moment in my mind. The sound of Michael's applause, the laughter of strangers, the feeling of being completely alone while surrounded by people who should have protected me. I started avoiding mirrors because I couldn't stand to see the woman I had become. Bent over from years of physical labor, gray-haired and worn down, living in a cramped apartment filled with furniture I couldn't afford to replace. When had I become someone worthy of mockery? When had my life become a punchline for wealthy people's entertainment? The phone calls from Michael stopped almost entirely after that night. Emily's social media posts continued showing their perfect family life. Expensive vacations, private school events, dinner parties with beautiful people, but I was conspicuously absent from all of it. It was as if I had been digitally erased from their story. I tried reaching out, leaving voicemails that went unreturned, sending text messages that received one-word responses if they were acknowledged at all. The more I tried to reconnect, the more distant they became, as if my desire for basic family connection was somehow inappropriate or demanding. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived in the apartment next to mine, noticed that I had stopped going out except for work and grocery shopping. She was a kind woman, a widow about my age who understood the particular loneliness that comes with outliving your usefulness to people who once needed you. "Mija," she said one afternoon when we happened to collect our mail at the same time. "You look so sad lately. Is everything okay with your family?" I almost lied, almost gave her the same cheerful deflection I had been giving everyone who asked. But something in her gentle brown eyes broke down my defenses, and the whole story came pouring out. The years of financial exploitation, the systematic exclusion, the public humiliation, the deafening silence from my son. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without judgment, occasionally shaking her head or making small sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know what I think?" she finally said. "I think you've been trying so hard to buy their love that you forgot you already deserve it for free." Her words stayed with me for days. Had I been trying to purchase affection that should have been given freely? Had I confused love with transaction, thinking that if I just gave enough money, made enough sacrifices, absorbed enough hurt, I would somehow earn the respect and inclusion I craved? But it's easy to say you deserve better treatment and much harder to actually believe it, especially when the people treating you badly are your own family. Part of me kept making excuses for Michael's behavior, finding ways to blame myself for the growing distance between us. Maybe I had been too dependent on him. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe my working-class background really was something to be ashamed of in his new social circle. Maybe I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention he was willing to give me. These thoughts circled in my mind like vultures, picking at what remained of my self-esteem. I had spent so many years defining my worth through my relationship with my son that I didn't know how to value myself independently of his opinion. That's when I started noticing things I had been too desperate to see before. How Emily talked about me when she thought I couldn't hear, referring to me as Michael's mother rather than using my name, as if I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. How Michael had started adopting her family's speech patterns and attitudes, using words and phrases I had never heard from him before. How the expensive gifts I had bankrupted myself to give their children were quickly forgotten or replaced, while presents from Emily's parents were treasured and displayed prominently. How conversations stopped when I entered a room, resumed when I left. How my stories about Michael's childhood were met with embarrassed silence, as if his humble origins were secrets that needed to be kept rather than history to be honored. I began to understand that I wasn't just excluded from their social circle. I was actively hidden from it. I was the family secret, the reminder of where they had come from that didn't fit with their carefully curated image of success and sophistication. The realization was devastating. My son wasn't just allowing his wife's family to treat me poorly. He was participating in the deception that I didn't exist, or at least that I didn't matter. But understanding the truth and finding the courage to act on it are two very different things. I was trapped by my own love, paralyzed by the fear that if I stopped accepting their poor treatment, I would lose them completely. What if Michael decided I was too much trouble and cut me out of his life entirely? What if I never saw my grandchildren again? What if this inadequate relationship was better than no relationship at all? These fears kept me sending money I couldn't afford, accepting invitations to events where I was treated like an unwelcome stranger, and swallowing hurt that was slowly poisoning my spirit. But life has a way of forcing decisions you're not ready to make. 3 months after Emily's birthday party, I had what the emergency room doctor called a minor cardiac event. Not quite a heart attack, but close enough to scare me into facing my own mortality. I was at work, cleaning the executive offices of a downtown law firm, when the chest pains started. Sharp, breathtaking pains that dropped me to my knees in front of a mahogany conference table that probably cost more than my yearly salary. The security guard found me there 20 minutes later, conscious but unable to get up. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and oxygen masks, paramedics asking questions I could barely answer because speaking required more energy than I had. At the hospital, they ran tests and hooked me up to machines that beeped with electronic urgency. The cardiologist, a young woman about Emily's age, explained that stress and exhaustion had pushed my body to its breaking point. My blood pressure was dangerously high, my heart rhythm irregular, my body chemistry thrown off by months of poor eating and inadequate sleep. "Do you have family we can call?" the nurse asked, clipboard in hand. I gave them Michael's number, then lay back in that narrow hospital bed and waited. Surely this would bring him running. Surely his mother having a heart episode would cut through whatever social embarrassment or marital pressure was keeping him away. Surely he would remember that he loved me, that I mattered, that losing me would leave a hole in his life. He didn't come. Emily called the hospital instead, speaking to my nurse in the crisp, efficient tone she used for handling unpleasant necessities. She explained that they were out of town at a business conference, couldn't possibly travel back immediately, but would check on me as soon as it was convenient. A business conference. While his mother was in the cardiac unit of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my son was attending a business conference that was apparently too important to leave. I spent 3 days in that hospital bed, watching other patients receive visits from worried family members while I stared at a phone that never rang. The flowers and balloons and anxious conversations that filled other rooms never materialized in mine. Even the hospital staff began to look at me with the particular pity reserved for people who have been forgotten by those who should care most. Mrs. Rodriguez was the only person who came to see me. She brought homemade soup in a thermos and sat beside my bed for 2 hours, talking about her own children and grandchildren, carefully avoiding the obvious question of where my family was. When I was finally discharged, I took a cab home to an empty apartment. No follow-up calls from Michael, no flowers, no check-in messages asking how I was feeling. It was as if my medical emergency had never happened. That's when I found the receipts. While organizing my financial papers to calculate my medical expenses, I discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in a folder of old bank statements were copies of deposits I had made to Michael and Emily's account over the years, money I had sent for emergencies, contributions to the children's education funds, help with various expenses they had claimed were temporary hardships. The dates told a story I hadn't noticed before. The emergency expense for David's medical bills had been deposited the same week Emily posted pictures of a luxury weekend in Napa Valley. The money I had sent to help with their mortgage had coincided with the purchase of a new BMW. The contribution I had made to Sarah's music lessons had been made while they were renovating their kitchen with granite countertops and high-end appliances. They had been lying to me. Systematically, deliberately lying about their financial needs while using my money to fund a lifestyle that was already well beyond what they could afford on their own income. I sat at my small kitchen table with those receipts spread out before me, calculating the total amount I had given them over the years. The number was staggering. More than $60,000 from a woman who had never made more than $25,000 in a single year. $60,000 that had come from second mortgages and skipped meals, from working extra shifts while my body screamed in protest, from choosing between my medication and their wants. $60,000 they had taken while treating me like an embarrassment to be hidden and managed. That night, I called Michael for the first time since my hospital stay. When he finally answered, his voice carried that familiar tone of barely concealed irritation. "Mom, how are you feeling? Sorry we couldn't make it to the hospital, but you know how crazy work gets." "I know about the money," I said quietly. There was a pause that stretched too long, filled with the kind of silence that confirms guilt better than any confession. "What money?" he asked, but his voice had changed, become guarded and defensive. "All of it, Michael. Every deposit, every emergency, every time you told me you needed help. I know when you received the money, and I know what you actually spent it on." Another pause. Then Emily's voice in the background, sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mom, I don't know what you think you discovered, but I discovered that my son has been lying to me for years," I interrupted. "I discovered that you've been taking money from a woman who can't afford to give it while treating her like she doesn't deserve basic respect or honesty." "That's not fair," Michael said, his voice rising. "We never forced you to give us anything. We never held a gun to your head." "You're right," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "You never forced me. You just manipulated me. You let me think you needed help while you spent my sacrifices on luxuries. You let me bankrupt myself trying to prove I loved you." "Mom, you're being dramatic. We always appreciated—" "No," I said, and the word came out stronger than I expected. "No, Michael. Appreciation doesn't look like applauding when someone calls your mother a maid. Appreciation doesn't look like avoiding the hospital when she has a heart episode. Appreciation doesn't look like lying about emergencies to take her money." The call ended with him hanging up on me. For the first time in my adult life, my son hung up the phone rather than continue a conversation with his mother. I sat there in my quiet apartment, still holding the receiver, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not another heart palpitation, something else. Something that felt almost like relief. For the first time in years, I had told the truth about what was happening to me. I had named the behavior I had been enabling, the lies I had been accepting, the relationship I had been financing at the cost of my own well-being. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked at myself honestly in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, not just the quick glances while brushing my teeth or fixing my hair. I studied the face looking back at me, lined with years of worry and exhaustion, but still recognizably the face of the young woman who had raised a son alone and been proud of her strength. When had I stopped being proud of myself? When had I started believing that my worth was determined by other people's approval? When had I forgotten that the woman in the mirror had accomplished something extraordinary, raising a good man from nothing, sacrificing everything to give him opportunities she never had? The man Michael had become might not appreciate those sacrifices, but that didn't make them less valuable. His inability to honor what I had given him was a reflection of his character, not mine. I made myself breakfast, real breakfast, not the instant oatmeal I usually grabbed on my way to work, and ate it slowly while making a list. Not a grocery list or a budget calculation, but a list of truths I needed to remember. I am not responsible for other adults' financial choices. I do not have to earn love through money or sacrifice. Respect is not optional in healthy relationships. I have the right to be treated with dignity by my own family. My worth is not determined by other people's opinion of me. Simple statements, but revolutionary for someone who had spent years believing the opposite. That afternoon, I called my bank and closed the joint account I had set up years ago to make it easier to transfer money to Michael and Emily. The account they had access to for emergencies that never seemed to be actual emergencies. The banker, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, asked if I was sure about closing the account. Sometimes these family financial arrangements can be complicated, he said diplomatically. I'm sure, I replied. Very sure. Walking home from the bank, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had been carrying invisible weights that I had finally set down. The Chicago streets looked different too, less harsh, more alive with possibility. That evening, my phone rang. Michael's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, not because I was avoiding him, but because I needed to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. His message was exactly what I expected. A mixture of anger and manipulation, hurt feelings and emotional blackmail. Mom, I can't believe you closed our account without even talking to us. Emily's really upset. The kids are asking why Grandma is being mean to Daddy. I don't understand why you're doing this to our family. Doing this to our family. As if protecting myself from further financial exploitation was an attack on them, rather than a necessary act of self-preservation. I didn't call him back that night. Instead, I ran a hot bath, something I rarely allowed myself time for, and soaked in water that was exactly as hot as I wanted it. No one to consider, no one to accommodate, no one whose needs had to come before my own basic comfort. The next week brought a flurry of contact from Michael and Emily. Phone calls, text messages, even an email from Emily with the subject line, "Family Emergency." But I had learned to recognize their definition of emergency, and I wasn't interested in participating in their crisis anymore. Mrs. Rodriguez invited me for coffee one afternoon, and I found myself telling her about the closed bank account, the discovered receipts, the growing sense that I had been living someone else's expectations instead of my own life. Good for you, mija, she said, stirring sugar into her café con leche. My own daughter tried to pull something similar with me a few years ago. It took me too long to learn that enabling someone isn't the same as loving them. But what if they cut me off completely? I asked. What if I never see my grandchildren again? Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. What if you keep letting them treat you badly, and you teach those grandchildren that love looks like accepting disrespect? What kind of lesson is that? Her question haunted me for days. What was I teaching my grandchildren about relationships, about worth, about the way family members should treat each other? Was I showing them that love required financial sacrifice? That affection had to be purchased, that elder family members existed to serve, rather than to be honored. 2 weeks after closing the bank account, Leah called me. Not her parents, 7-year-old Leah, using Emily's phone when her mother wasn't watching. Grandma? Her small voice was cautious, uncertain. Hi, sweetheart. I've missed hearing from you. Mommy says you're mad at us, she said. Are you mad at me too? The innocence in her question broke my heart. This child, the one family member who had always been genuinely glad to see me, was now worried that she had done something wrong. Oh, honey, no. I'm not mad at you at all. I love you very much. Then why don't you come to see us anymore? How do you explain adult dysfunction to a 7-year-old? How do you tell a child that her parents have been treating her grandmother badly without making her feel responsible for fixing it? Sometimes grown-ups need to work out problems, I said carefully, but those problems have nothing to do with how much I love you. I made you a picture, she said. It's you and me at the park, feeding the ducks. Remember when we did that? I remembered. One of the few times Emily had allowed me to take Leah somewhere alone, a beautiful autumn afternoon when we had walked along the lakefront and talked about everything and nothing. Leah had been fascinated by the ducks, delighted by their enthusiasm for the bread we brought. I remember, I said, tears threatening to spill over. That was one of the best days I've had in a long time. I want to go feed the ducks again, she said. Can we do that soon? Before I could answer, I heard Emily's voice in the background, sharp and angry. The line went dead. That call crystallized something for me. Whatever happened between Michael and me, whatever consequences came from standing up for myself, I couldn't let my relationship with my grandchildren become collateral damage. They deserved to know their grandmother, and I deserved to know them, independent of whatever dysfunction existed between their parents and me. But I also couldn't allow them to witness continuous disrespect toward me. Children learn what they see, absorb the relationship patterns they observe. If I kept accepting poor treatment, I would be teaching them that such treatment was normal and acceptable. It was the impossible balance to strike, and I didn't have any clear answers. All I knew was that something fundamental had to change, even if I couldn't predict or control all the consequences. The breakthrough came, unexpectedly, through Mrs. Chen. Remember her? The neighbor who had watched Michael when he was little, who had been one of the few stable presences during those difficult early years of single motherhood. She was 84 now and living with her daughter's family in Chinatown, but she still remembered me fondly. Her daughter called one afternoon to say that Mrs. Chen had been asking about me, wondering if I might visit. I took the Red Line downtown the next Saturday, carrying a box of the almond cookies Mrs. Chen had always loved. Her daughter met me at the door of a tidy apartment that smelled like incense and star anise, the comforting sense of a culture that honored its elders rather than hiding them. Mrs. Chen's face lit up when she saw me. Age had bent her small frame and stolen some of her English, but her smile was exactly as I remembered. "Margaret," she said, reaching for my hands with fingers that were still surprisingly strong. "You look tired. Sit. Tell me about Michael." Her daughter brought tea and left us alone in the living room, surrounded by photos of multiple generations all together, children and parents and grandparents occupying the same frame with obvious pride and affection. I found myself telling Mrs. Chen everything. The years of financial exploitation, the social exclusion, the hospital stay that brought no family support, the recent discovery of lies and manipulation. She listened with the patience of someone who had lived long enough to understand that family relationships could be complicated and painful. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea and studying my face. "You know what I think?" she finally said, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "I think you forgot who you are. You are a strong woman. You raised good boy alone. You worked so hard, sacrificed so much. But now you let that boy and his wife make you feel small." She leaned forward, fixing me with eyes that were still sharp despite their age. "In my culture, we honor our elders. We don't ask them to pay for our love. We don't hide them from our friends. We don't make them feel shameful for what they gave us." She shook her head sadly. "Your son forgot how to honor his mother." "But what do I do?" I asked. "How do I fix this without losing them completely?" Mrs. Chen smiled, the kind of smile that held decades of wisdom earned through experience. "You don't fix them," she said. "You fix you. You remember who you are. You stop being small for people who should make you feel big. You stop paying for love that should be free." She reached over and patted my hand with the same gentle firmness she had used when instructing me about childcare 30 years ago. "Love yourself first," she said. "Show them how you deserve to be treated by treating yourself that way. Some people they learn, some people they don't. But you still have to love yourself." I rode the train home with Mrs. Chen's words echoing in my mind. Love yourself first. Such simple advice, but revolutionary for someone who had spent decades putting everyone else's needs before her own. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Michael was small. I cooked myself a real dinner, not just heating up a frozen meal or eating cereal for supper, but actually preparing food with care and intention. Chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, rice pilaf, the kind of meal I used to make when I had someone to cook for. I set the table with real dishes instead of eating from the pot, lit a candle I had been saving for a special occasion, and ate slowly while listening to music I enjoyed. It felt almost revolutionary, this simple act of treating myself with the same care I had always shown others. After dinner, I pulled out photo albums I hadn't looked at in years. Pictures of Michael as a baby, a toddler, a school-age child. evidence of the life we had built together, the love we had shared, the bond that had sustained us through difficult years. But I also found photos of myself, the young woman who had been so proud of her independence, so determined to create a good life for her son. When had I stopped seeing that strength in myself? When had I started believing that my worth depended on other people's approval? Looking at those old photos, I could see clearly that the woman I had been would never have accepted the treatment the woman I had become was tolerating. She would have been appalled at the idea of bankrupting herself to buy love from people who should have loved her freely. I spent the weekend in a kind of productive solitude, cleaning my apartment, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I deserved to live in a space that reflected the care I had for myself. I went through my closet and got rid of clothes that were worn out or didn't fit properly, keeping only things that made me feel comfortable and confident. I balanced my checkbook honestly for the first time in months, calculating exactly how much money I had given to Michael and Emily and how much debt I had incurred in the process. The numbers were sobering, but they were also illuminating. I could see clearly now how my financial situation had deteriorated as my emotional situation had worsened. But I also realized that I wasn't destitute. I had Social Security, a small pension from years of union jobs, and if I stopped sending money to people who didn't need it, I could actually live quite comfortably on what I had. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think and plan. I spent the day researching senior services in Chicago, looking for resources that could help me navigate this difficult transition. I found a support group for older adults dealing with family financial abuse. Apparently, it was common enough to have its own category and meeting schedule. I found legal aid services that could help me understand my rights. I found counseling services specifically designed for people in my situation. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful instead of helpless. The support group met Tuesday evenings at a community center in Logan Square. I almost didn't go. The idea of discussing my private family business with strangers felt overwhelming. But Mrs. Chen's words kept echoing in my mind. Love yourself first. The group was smaller than I expected, maybe 8 people ranging in age from their 50s to their 80s. The facilitator, a social worker named Janet, was about my age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that put me at ease immediately. Would anyone like to share what brought them here tonight? She asked after we had all introduced ourselves. An elderly man named Robert spoke first. His story was heartbreakingly familiar. Adult children who had moved back home during financial difficulties and gradually taken over his house, his finances, his independence. They controlled his Social Security checks, decided what he could spend money on, made him feel like a burden in his own home. A woman named Patricia talked about a daughter who had power of attorney and was systematically draining her mother's savings account while providing minimal care in return. Patricia had discovered the theft by accident and was struggling with the choice between prosecution and family preservation. Each story resonated with my own experience, different in details but similar in the fundamental betrayal of trust and exploitation of love. I wasn't alone in this experience, wasn't uniquely foolish or weak. I was part of a sadly common pattern of abuse that happened when people exploited the unconditional love of older family members. When it was my turn to speak, I told them about Michael and Emily, about the money I had given and the respect I hadn't received in return. I told them about the birthday party humiliation and my son's applause at my expense. The hardest part, I said, surprising myself with my honesty, is that I raised him to be better than this. I taught him to be grateful and kind and respectful. I don't understand how he became someone who could treat his mother this way. Janet nodded with understanding. One of the most difficult things about family financial abuse is that we often can't reconcile the person who's hurting us with the person we thought we knew. But people can change, especially when they're influenced by others, or when they start prioritizing material success over family relationships. What do? I asked. How do I protect myself without losing my grandchildren? You set boundaries, Janet said. Clear, consistent boundaries that you enforce regardless of other people's reactions. You stop enabling behavior that hurts you. You model self-respect for your grandchildren so they learn what healthy relationships look like. It sounded so simple when she said it, but I knew the implementation would be anything but easy. After the meeting, Robert approached me in the parking lot. My situation with my kids got worse before it got better, he said. But it did get better. Not the way I hoped it would, but better than it was when I was pretending everything was fine. He handed me a slip of paper with his phone number. Call me if you need someone to talk to who understands. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us worst, but that doesn't mean we have to keep letting them do it. I drove home that night feeling less alone than I had in months. There were other people who understood, other people who had faced similar choices, other people who had found ways to protect themselves while still holding on to hope for reconciliation. But I also knew that understanding my situation and changing it were two very different things. The real test would come when I had to actually enforce the boundaries I was learning to set. I didn't have to wait long. Thursday afternoon, Emily called. Her voice was different than usual, less controlled, more urgent. Margaret, we need to talk, she said without preamble. Can you come over tonight? I'm not available tonight, I said, which was technically true. I had plans to read a library book and take a long bath, and those plans were just as valid as any social obligation. This is important, Emily insisted. It's about the children. The old me would have dropped everything and rushed over, terrified that something was wrong with my grandchildren. But I was learning to recognize Emily's manipulation tactics, and using the children as emotional leverage was one of her favorites. If something is wrong with the children, you should call their father, I said calmly. If this is about something else, we can talk over the phone. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Emily recalibrating her approach. Fine, she said, her voice taking on the sharp edge I had learned to dread. Michael lost his job yesterday. His company is downsizing, and they eliminated his entire department. We need help with the mortgage payment this month. There it was, another emergency, another crisis that required my financial intervention. 6 months ago, I would have been writing a check before the conversation ended, terrified of what would happen to my son's family if I didn't step in immediately. I'm sorry to hear about Michael's job, I said, and I genuinely was sorry. Despite everything, I didn't want my son to suffer financial hardship. That must be very stressful for both of you. So you'll help us? Emily asked, her voice brightening with assumption. No, I said quietly. I won't be able to help financially. The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had been disconnected. What do you mean you won't be able to help? Emily's voice was sharp with disbelief. Margaret, this is serious. We could lose the house. I understand that it's serious, I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady. But I'm not in a position to help with your mortgage payment. Since when? Emily demanded. You've always helped before. You sent us money just 6 months ago for David's school expenses. That was then, I said. This is now. My financial situation has changed. It was true, in a way. My financial situation had changed. I had stopped allowing other people to drain it. This is ridiculous, Emily said, her voice rising. We're family. Family helps family, especially when children are involved. You're right that family helps family, I agreed, but help goes both directions. It's not just one person giving while others take. What's that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would change everything between us. It means that for years, I've been giving you money while receiving very little respect or consideration in return. It means that I've been financing a lifestyle I can't afford while being treated like an embarrassment to your family. It means that I've been enabling your financial dependence instead of encouraging your independence. Another long silence. I can't believe this, Emily said finally. Your son loses his job, your grandchildren's security is at stake, and you're worried about respect? My grandchildren's security isn't my responsibility, I said. It's their parents' responsibility. You and Michael are adults with college educations and professional skills. You'll figure out how to handle this crisis without my money. Margaret, you're being incredibly selfish, Emily said, her voice cold with anger. I never would have expected this from you. And I never would have expected to be called a maid at your birthday party while my son applauded, I replied. But here we are. Emily hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my quiet apartment, phone still in my hand, marveling at what had just happened. For the first time in years, I had said no to a financial request from my family. I had stated my boundaries clearly and calmly, without apology or extensive justification. It felt terrifying and empowering at the same time. Within an hour, Michael called. His voice was a mixture of hurt and anger, the tone of someone who couldn't believe he wasn't getting what he had always received before. Mom, Emily told me about your conversation. I can't believe you won't help us. I'm sorry about your job loss, Michael, I said, but I won't be providing financial assistance. Why not? He asked. And for a moment, he sounded like the confused little boy he used to be when he couldn't understand why something wasn't fair. Because I've given you over $60,000 in the past 5 years, and in return, I've been excluded, disrespected, and humiliated. Because you applauded when someone called your mother a maid. Because you didn't visit when I was in the hospital with heart problems. That's not fair, Michael protested. You can't use those things to punish us now. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. Mom, I don't understand where this is coming from. We've always had a good relationship. The innocence in his voice, whether real or performed, took my breath away. How could he possibly think we had a good relationship when he had been treating me so poorly? How disconnected was he from the impact of his behavior? Michael, I said softly, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for something, not to invite me somewhere, just to talk. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. When was the last time you thanked me for the money I've sent over the years? Another pause. I don't remember. When was the last time you defended me when someone in Emily's family was rude to me? This time, the silence stretched so long I wondered if he had hung up. I'm trying to be a good husband, he said finally. And I'm trying to be a good mother, I replied. Sometimes being a good mother means saying no when your child is making bad choices. Taking care of family isn't a bad choice, he argued. You're right, I agreed. But I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm asking you to treat me with basic respect. I'm asking you to be honest about your financial needs instead of lying about emergencies. I'm asking you to defend your mother when people insult her, not applaud them. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, less certain. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. For the first time in our conversation, he sounded like my son instead of Emily's husband. For the first time, he seemed to understand that something was genuinely wrong between us that went deeper than just this one financial request. I don't know either, I admitted, but I know that nothing will get better as long as we keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. We ended that conversation without resolution, but also without hostility. For the first time in months, we had talked honestly about our relationship instead of dancing around problems we both knew existed. I didn't sleep well that night, but it wasn't the anxious insomnia I had been experiencing for months. Instead, it was the restless energy that comes with major life changes, the uncomfortable but necessary process of establishing new patterns after years of destructive ones. The next morning, I got a text message from Leah. I love you, Grandma. Mommy says you're sad. I hope you feel better soon. The message was clearly composed and sent with Emily's help. 7-year-olds don't usually text in complete sentences with proper punctuation, but I could hear Leah's voice in the words, and I knew her love was genuine even if her access to me was being controlled. I texted back, "I love you too, sweetheart." Sometimes grown-ups need time to work things out, but that never changes how much I love you. Over the weekend, I heard nothing from Michael or Emily. Part of me worried that they were freezing me out completely, punishing me for setting boundaries by cutting off all contact. But part of me felt relieved not to be constantly navigating their drama and demands. I spent Saturday at the Art Institute, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. I wandered through galleries full of paintings and sculptures, absorbing beauty created by people who had refused to let circumstances limit their vision. In the American wing, I stopped in front of a painting by Mary Cassatt, a tender portrait of a mother and child. The love in the mother's face was unmistakable, but so was her strength. She wasn't sacrificing herself for her child. She was nurturing them from a place of wholeness and self-possession. That's who I wanted to be, I realized. Not the martyr mother who gave until she had nothing left, but the strong mother who loved from abundance rather than depletion. Sunday, I went to church for the first time in months. I had stopped attending when Emily made comments about my church being a little unsophisticated compared to the higher-end Episcopal church they attended. I had been embarrassed by my small, working-class congregation with its simple sanctuary and second-hand hymnals. But sitting in those familiar wooden pews, surrounded by people who hugged me and asked how I was feeling and genuinely cared about the answer, I realized how much I had missed authentic community. These were people who knew my story, who had supported me through Michael's childhood, who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. After service, Pastor Williams pulled me aside. "Margaret, I haven't seen you in a while. Is everything okay?" I found myself telling him about the family situation, the financial exploitation, the recent decision to set boundaries. He listened without judgment, nodding occasionally with the understanding of someone who had counseled many people through similar struggles. "You know what I think?" he said when I finished. "I think you've been confusing love with enabling. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their destructive behavior." "But what if they cut me off completely?" I asked. "What if I lose my grandchildren?" Pastor Williams smiled gently. "Faith isn't about controlling outcomes, Margaret. Faith is about doing what's right and trusting God with the results. You can't force people to treat you well, but you can stop allowing them to treat you badly." His words stayed with me through the following week as I settled into new routines that didn't revolve around other people's needs and demands. I read books I enjoyed, watched movies I wanted to see, took walks in my neighborhood without rushing to get to somewhere else. It was a quiet life, but it was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Wednesday evening, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a small voice said, "Grandma, it's me, Leah." "Hi, sweetheart. How did you get this phone?" "I'm at Jenny's house," she said, referring to a school friend. "Her mom let me call you. I miss you so much, Grandma. Why don't you come see us anymore?" My heart broke a little at the confusion in her voice. "I miss you too, baby. Very much." "Mommy says you don't want to help Daddy anymore. She says you don't care about our family." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar anger at Emily for involving the children in adult problems, but I kept my voice gentle for Leah's sake. "That's not true, sweetheart. I love you and David and Sarah very much. I love your daddy too. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, but that doesn't mean anyone stops loving anyone else." "Are you still going to be my grandma?" she asked, and the fear in her voice was heartbreaking. "Always," I said firmly. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, I will always be your grandma, and I will always love you. Promise?" "I promise, sweet girl. Nothing will ever change that." After we hung up, I cried for 20 minutes. Not the quiet tears of self-pity I had shed for months, but angry tears at the emotional manipulation of innocent children, at the way Emily was weaponizing my grandchildren's love to try to control my behavior. But I also felt more resolved than ever to maintain my boundaries. If I gave in now, if I returned to the old patterns of financial enabling and absorbed disrespect, what would I be teaching Leah about relationships? What would I be modeling for her about self-worth and dignity? I wanted her to grow up knowing that love didn't require you to accept poor treatment, that family relationships should be based on mutual respect rather than financial transactions, that women could be strong and independent even when it was difficult. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I applied for a part-time job at the Art Institute. They were looking for gallery docents, volunteers who would lead tours and help visitors understand the collections. It was something I had never considered before, but it combined my love of art with my desire to be useful in a way that felt life-giving rather than draining. The application process required references, and I realized I hadn't used my professional skills for anything other than survival jobs in decades. But my supervisor at the cleaning company spoke highly of my reliability and work ethic. And Pastor Williams provided a character reference that made me sound like someone worth knowing. 2 weeks later, I was invited for an interview. I bought a new outfit for the occasion, not expensive, but something that made me feel confident and professional. The interview went better than I expected, and I found myself talking enthusiastically about art and education and the joy of sharing beauty with other people. They offered me the position on the spot. For the first time in months, I called someone with good news instead of crisis or complaint. Mrs. Rodriguez was delighted to hear about my new job, and we celebrated with coffee and pastries from a bakery we had always admired but never splurged on. "You sound different," she said as we sat at her kitchen table. "Happier, stronger." "I feel different," I admitted. "It's been hard, setting boundaries with Michael and Emily, but it's also been liberating. I forgot what it felt like to make decisions based on what I want instead of what other people need from me." "And your son? Have you heard from him?" "Not much," I said. "I think they're hoping I'll change my mind if they wait long enough. Or maybe they're just angry that their usual source of emergency funding dried up." "Give him time," Mrs. Rodriguez advised. "Sometimes people need to feel the consequences of their behavior before they understand why it was wrong." I started my volunteer work at the Art Institute the following Monday. The training was intensive but enjoyable, and I found myself learning things I had never known about art history and museum curation. My fellow docents were all volunteers, mostly retired professionals who had decided to spend their free time sharing their knowledge and enthusiasm with others. For the first time in years, I was part of a community that valued my contributions and treated me as an equal. No one cared what neighborhood I lived in or how much money I had. They cared about my commitment to the museum's mission and my ability to connect with visitors from all walks of life. Leading my first tour was nerve-wracking, but also exhilarating. The group included families with young children, college students, elderly couples, and international tourists. A diverse mixture of people united by curiosity about art and culture. In the American wing, we stopped in front of the Mary Cassatt painting I had admired weeks earlier. I found myself talking about the strength in the mother's face, the way love could be expressed through presence and attention rather than sacrifice and self-denial. The artist understood something important about motherhood, I told the group. That loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. That the best mothers are whole people who share their completeness rather than martyrs who give until they have nothing left. After the tour, a young mother approached me. "Thank you for what you said about the Cassatt painting," she said. "I needed to hear that today." Driving home from the museum, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just a few weeks. I had a purpose beyond serving other people's needs, activities that brought me joy rather than exhaustion, friendships based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. I was learning to be alone without being lonely, to be independent without being isolated. That evening, Michael called. His voice sounded different, less demanding, more uncertain. "Mom, I've been thinking about our last conversation," he said. I waited, not sure what to expect. "Emily and I have been having some problems," he continued. "She's angry about you not helping with the mortgage, and she's been saying things about you that don't feel right to me." "What kind of things?" I asked. "She keeps talking about how selfish you're being, how you've never really supported our family, how you're just looking for attention." He paused. "But that's not true, is it? You've helped us a lot over the years." "Yes," I said quietly. "I have." "I looked at our bank records," he said. "I added up all the money you've sent us. Mom, I had no idea it was that much. I never thought about where you were getting it from or what it was costing you." For the first time in months, I heard genuine remorse in his voice. "I've been a terrible son," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. "I let Emily and her family treat you badly. I stopped defending you. I stopped calling just to check on you. I took your money and your love for granted." I felt my own tears starting. "Michael." "No, let me finish," he said. "I know why you stopped giving us money. I know why you won't help with the mortgage. It's not because you don't love us. It's because we haven't been treating you like we love you." "That's right," I said softly. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. "Emily is furious with both of us. She says if you won't help family in crisis, then you're not really family at all. But I keep thinking about how proud I used to be of you, how much I admired your strength, and I can't figure out when I stopped seeing you that way." "You got busy with your own life," I said. "That's normal. But somewhere along the way, you started seeing me as a resource rather than a person. You stopped considering my feelings and my needs." "How do I change that?" he asked. "How do I become the son you deserve again?" It was the question I had been hoping to hear for months, but now that he was asking it, I didn't have a simple answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "This isn't something you can fix with an apology. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through consistent action over time." "Will you give me that chance?" he asked. "Will you let me try?" "I want to," I said. "But things can't go back to the way they were. I can't go back to being the person who gives everything and asks for nothing in return." "I understand," he said. "What would you need from me?" "Respect," I said immediately. "Basic human respect. Don't ask me for money. Don't let other people insult me without defending me. Call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. Include me in family events because you want me there, not because you feel obligated." "That doesn't sound like too much to ask," he said. "It shouldn't be," I agreed. "But it will require you to have some difficult conversations with Emily. She's going to have to change how she treats me, too." There was a long pause. "Emily and I are having problems about more than just this situation with you," he said finally. "She's angry that I lost my job. She's angry that we can't maintain the lifestyle we've gotten used to. She's talking about moving back to her parents' house until I find something new." I felt a pang of sympathy for my son, caught between his wife's expectations and their financial reality. But I also knew that this crisis was an opportunity for them to reassess their priorities and spending habits. "Maybe that's not such a bad idea," I said. "Her parents can afford to support you in a way I can't. And maybe some time apart would help us all figure out how to have healthier relationships." "You think Emily and I should separate?" Michael asked, sounding shocked. "I think you should both figure out what you want from life and whether you want the same things," I said. "I think you should consider whether your marriage is based on love and partnership or just shared financial goals." It was blunt advice, but I had learned that indirect communication had contributed to our family's problems. If Michael was finally ready to hear difficult truths, I was ready to tell them. "I need to think about all of this," he said. "But Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For taking your money and your love for granted. For not defending you. For applauding when Richard called you a maid. I hate that I did that. I'm sorry too," I said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to speak up for myself. I'm sorry I enabled behavior that wasn't good for any of us." We ended the conversation with tentative plans to meet for lunch the following week. Just the two of us, no Emily. No predetermined agenda other than trying to reconnect as mother and son. It felt like the first genuine conversation we had shared in years. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in ages. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, but for myself rather than because I was ashamed of it. I bought fresh flowers and cooked myself a nice dinner and invited Mrs. Rodriguez over to share it. "You seem more like yourself lately," she observed as we enjoyed dessert together. "More comfortable in your own skin." "I am," I said. "It's strange. I thought setting boundaries with Michael and Emily would make me feel isolated, but actually, it's made me feel more connected to myself and to other people who treat me well." "That's how it works," Mrs. Rodriguez said with a knowing smile. "When you stop accepting poor treatment, you make room for better relationships." Sunday, I got another call from Leah. This time, she was with her other grandmother, Emily's mother, Patricia. "Grandma Margaret?" Leah's voice was small and sad. "Mommy and Daddy are fighting a lot. Are they getting divorced because of you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Emily was blaming me for their marital problems, making a 7-year-old child worry that her grandmother was responsible for breaking up her parents' marriage. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "Mommy and Daddy's problems have nothing to do with me. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that they need to work out themselves. But Mommy says you won't help Daddy find a job," Leah said, confusion evident in her voice. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain adult dysfunction to a child without making her feel responsible for fixing it. "Grandma's job is to love you and your daddy, not to solve all of his problems," I said carefully. "Daddy is a smart, capable grown-up who can figure out how to find a new job. And Mommy and Daddy's marriage problems are their responsibility to fix, not anyone else's." "I just want everyone to stop being mad," Leah said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I know, baby. I want that too. But sometimes people have to work through difficult feelings before they can stop being mad. The important thing for you to remember is that none of this is your fault, and all the grown-ups in your life love you very much." After we hung up, I was furious with Emily for involving Leah in adult conflicts. But I was also sad for my granddaughter, caught in the middle of problems she couldn't understand or control. That call strengthened my resolve to maintain my boundaries. Whatever was happening between Michael and Emily, whatever financial or marital problems they might be experiencing, I would not return to the old patterns of enabling and financial rescue that had damaged all of our relationships. The lunch with Michael was scheduled for Tuesday at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, not far from their house but neutral territory where we could talk privately. I arrived early and chose a corner table where we wouldn't be overheard, my stomach nervous with anticipation. Michael looked older when he walked in, more tired than I remembered. He hugged me briefly when he sat down, and for a moment he felt like my boy again instead of the distant stranger he had become. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said once we had ordered. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try if you are." We talked for 2 hours. Really talked, probably more honestly than we had communicated in years. Michael told me about the pressure he felt to maintain a lifestyle that required 2 substantial incomes, about Emily's expectations and her family's influence, about his own confusion about what he really wanted from life. I told him about the years of loneliness and financial strain, about feeling excluded from his family while being expected to support it financially, about the gradual erosion of my self-worth that had culminated in that terrible birthday party humiliation. "I keep thinking about that night," he said, about Richard's joke and my reaction. I was drunk, and I was showing off for Emily's friends, and I wanted to fit in with people I thought were more sophisticated than me. "So you decided your mother was an acceptable target for their humor?" I asked. He flinched. "When you put it like that, it sounds unforgivable." "It felt unforgivable," I said. "But I'm here, aren't I? I'm willing to work toward forgiveness if you're willing to work toward change." "I am," he said immediately. "Emily doesn't understand why this matters so much to me. Why I can't just let things go back to the way they were. But I can't unsee what I've been doing to you. I can't unknow how badly I've been treating the person who sacrificed everything for me." "What does Emily say about all of this?" I asked. Michael's face darkened. "She thinks you're being manipulative. She says you're creating drama to get attention, that you're punishing us for not being grateful enough for your help." "And what do you think?" "I think Emily has never had to sacrifice for anyone in her life, so she doesn't understand what it means to give and get nothing back but demands for more." It was harsh, but probably accurate assessment of his wife's character. Emily had never known financial insecurity or family rejection, had never had to choose between her own needs and someone else's demands. "Michael," I said carefully, "I need you to understand something. Even if Emily never changes her attitude toward me, even if she continues to see me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved, I can't go back to accepting disrespect. I won't send money or absorb insults or pretend everything is fine when it's not." "I know," he said. "And honestly, I think that might be better for all of us. We've been living beyond our means, relying on you to subsidize a lifestyle we couldn't actually afford. Maybe it's time to be more realistic about what we can and can't have." "What about Emily? Will she be able to accept that?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said finally. "We're in counseling, trying to figure out if we want the same things from life. Her parents think I'm not ambitious enough, that I'm holding her back from the kind of life she deserves. Sometimes I wonder if they're right." "What kind of life do you think you deserve?" I asked. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "I used to think it was the big house and expensive cars and private schools for the kids. But I've been miserable trying to maintain all of that. I work constantly, we fight about money constantly, and we treat people we should love, like you, badly because we're so stressed about keeping up appearances." We parted that day with a tentative plan to meet again the following week, and a promise that he would start calling me regularly just to check in. It wasn't a miracle reconciliation, but it felt like the beginning of something more authentic than what we had shared in years. Walking back to my car, I reflected on how different this conversation had felt from our interactions over the past few years. We had talked like equals, like two adults working through a difficult problem together, rather than the manipulative dance of demands and enabling that had characterized our recent relationship. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the possibility of rebuilding a genuine relationship with my son. That hope was tested the following weekend when Emily called. "Margaret, we need to talk," she said without preamble, her voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "Hello, Emily," I said calmly. "What can I do for you?" "You can stop poisoning my husband against me," she said. "Michael came home from lunch with you full of ideas about how we need to change our lifestyle and lower our expectations. He's talking about selling the house and moving somewhere cheaper. Those sound like reasonable responses to unemployment," I said. "We're not unemployed," Emily snapped. "Michael is between positions, it's temporary, but he's acting like we need to abandon everything we've worked for just because you've decided to withdraw your support." "Emily," I said as gently as I could manage, "Michael and I talked about a lot of things, but I didn't tell him to make any specific changes to your marriage or lifestyle. Those are decisions you two need to make together. But you put these ideas in his head about living within our means and being realistic about what we can afford. He never talked like that before." "Maybe he never felt free to talk like that before," I suggested. Maybe he felt pressure to maintain a lifestyle that required constant financial stress. "We're successful people," Emily said, her voice rising. "We deserve to live well. We deserve nice things." "You deserve whatever you can afford to pay for with your own money," I said. "But you don't deserve to have other people sacrifice their financial security to subsidize your lifestyle." "I never asked you to sacrifice anything," Emily said coldly. "You offered to help, and we accepted. If you couldn't afford it, you shouldn't have offered." The casualness of her dismissal took my breath away. Years of genuine financial hardship on my part, dismissed as my own poor judgment, rather than their exploitation of my love. "You're right," I said. "I shouldn't have offered help I couldn't afford. I shouldn't have enabled spending I couldn't support. I shouldn't have allowed you to treat me poorly while I subsidized your lifestyle." "So this is about respect again," Emily said with disgust. "You're holding our entire family hostage because your feelings got hurt." "This is about reality," I said. "The reality that I don't have unlimited money to give you. The reality that treating people badly has consequences. The reality that relationships have to be mutual to be sustainable." "Fine," Emily said, "but don't expect to be part of this family if you're not willing to act like family." "Acting like family doesn't mean accepting abuse," I said. "It means treating each other with love and respect." Emily hung up on me, but not before I heard her say something to someone else in the room about manipulative old bitches. I sat in my quiet apartment after that call, shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation. Emily's hostility was nothing new, but having it directed at me so blatantly was still jarring. But what struck me most was how little her disapproval affected me compared to how it might have months ago. I no longer needed her approval or acceptance. I no longer measured my worth by her opinion of me. That felt like progress. The next few weeks brought a steady stream of contact from Michael, and sparse, hostile communication from Emily. Michael called twice a week as promised, usually brief conversations about his job search or updates about the children. He seemed to be making an effort to include me in his life without asking for anything in return. Emily's rare communications were uniformly manipulative, ranging from guilt trips about the children missing their grandmother to veiled threats about limiting my access to them. I responded calmly to requests for information and ignored attempts at emotional manipulation. The children, meanwhile, were adapting to the new family dynamics in different ways. David and Sarah, the older grandchildren, seemed largely unaffected by the adult conflicts, but Leah continued to call when she could, usually sounding confused and sad about the family tension. "Grandma, why is Mommy so mad all the time?" she asked during one call. "Sometimes grown-ups get stressed about things like work and money," I said. "It's not your fault, and it's not your job to fix it." "I drew you another picture," she said. "It's us having tea together like we used to do." "I would love to see that picture," I said, my heart aching with missing her. "Maybe when Mommy stops being mad, you can come have real tea with me again," Leah said hopefully. "Maybe," I agreed, though I wasn't sure when or if that would happen. In November, Michael called with unexpected news. He had found a new job. It paid less than his previous position, but it was steady work with good benefits and a more reasonable workload. "Congratulations," I said, genuinely pleased for him. "How do you feel about it?" "Relieved," he said. "And a little scared. Emily isn't happy about the salary cut, and her parents think I should hold out for something better. But honestly, Mom, I'm tired of the pressure. I want to work to live, not live to work." "That sounds healthy," I said. "Emily and I are still in counseling," he continued. "We're talking about a lot of things. Our expectations, our priorities, what we really want from life. It's hard, but I think it's necessary." "Are you happy?" I asked. There was a long pause. "I'm not sure I know what that means anymore," he said finally. but I feel more like myself than I have in years. 2 weeks before Christmas, I got a call I hadn't expected. Patricia, Emily's mother. "Margaret, I think we should have lunch," she said in her crisp, authoritative voice. I was curious about what she wanted to discuss, so I agreed to meet her at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. Patricia was punctual and perfectly dressed, as always, but she looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. "Thank you for coming," she said once we were seated. "I wanted to talk to you about this situation between you and Emily." I waited, not sure what to expect. "Emily is very upset about your decision to stop providing financial assistance," Patricia said. "She feels like you've abandoned the family during a difficult time." "I understand that Emily is upset," I said carefully, "but I had to make some difficult decisions about my own financial situation." "Margaret, I'm going to be direct with you," Patricia said. "Emily's father and I have been helping Michael and Emily more than they realize. We've been covering the mortgage since Michael lost his job, and we're prepared to continue doing so until he's back on his feet." This was news to me, though it explained how they had managed to avoid foreclosure despite Michael's unemployment. "That's very generous of you," I said. "We can afford to be generous," Patricia said, "but Emily is convinced that you could afford to help too, if you wanted to. She thinks your refusal is motivated by spite rather than necessity." "What do you think?" I asked. Patricia studied me for a moment. "I think you've been giving more than you could afford for years," she said quietly. "I think Emily has gotten used to depending on help from multiple sources without fully understanding what that help costs the people providing it." Her honesty surprised me. "Richard feels terrible about what he said at Emily's birthday party," Patricia continued. "He was drunk and showing off, and he didn't think about how hurtful his words were. Emily was mortified by his behavior, but she was too embarrassed to apologize." "And Michael?" I asked. "What was his excuse for applauding?" Patricia sighed. "Michael was trying to fit in with people he thought were more sophisticated than him. It was childish and cruel, but I don't think he understood how much it would hurt you." "It did hurt me," I said. "But more than that, it showed me how my own family saw me, as someone whose dignity could be sacrificed for other people's entertainment." "That's not how we see you," Patricia said, though her voice lacked conviction. "How do you see me?" I asked directly. Another pause. "As someone who has always been very generous with our family," she said diplomatically. "But not as an equal," I said. "Not as someone whose feelings and needs matter as much as everyone else's." Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Class differences can make family relationships complicated," she said finally. "This isn't about class," I said. "It's about respect. Rich people and poor people can treat each other with dignity if they choose to." "You're right," Patricia said quietly. "And I'm sorry we haven't always made that choice." We finished lunch with Patricia promising to talk to Emily about treating me with more consideration, and me promising to keep an open mind about family reconciliation. I didn't have high hopes for either outcome, but I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge that problems existed. Christmas that year was quiet and peaceful. I spent Christmas Eve at church and Christmas Day with Mrs. Rodriguez and her extended family, who welcomed me like I was a beloved aunt rather than a lonely neighbor. The contrast between their warm, chaotic gathering and the tense, performative holidays I had endured with Emily's family was striking. I exchanged gifts with my grandchildren through Michael, who came by alone to drop off presents and pick up the ones I had wrapped for David, Sarah, and Leah. The visit was brief but friendly, and for the first time in months, he looked relaxed. "How are things at home?" I asked. "Better," he said. "Emily and I are figuring out how to live on what I actually make instead of what we wish I made. It's an adjustment, but it's also a relief not to be constantly worried about money." "What about Emily's attitude toward me?" I asked. Michael's expression grew more serious. "She's still angry, but she's starting to understand that this situation isn't entirely your fault. Her mother's been talking to her about respect and family relationships. And how do you feel about everything? I feel like I'm finally growing up, he said. Like I'm just now learning how to be a husband and father and son without letting other people's expectations control my decisions. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it felt like genuine progress. The new year brought unexpected changes. In February, Emily called me directly for the first time since our hostile conversation months earlier. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. I was so surprised I almost didn't respond. "I've been talking to a therapist about family relationships and personal responsibility," she continued. "She's helped me understand that I've been treating you unfairly for years." "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "I grew up in a family where money solved most problems," Emily said. "When there was a crisis, someone wrote a check and made it go away. I never learned to consider where that money came from or what it cost the people providing it." It was more insight than I had expected from Emily. "I also never learned to value people for what they gave beyond money," she continued. "I never appreciated your emotional support, or your wisdom, or your history with Michael. I only saw you as a resource rather than a person." "That hurt," I said quietly. "I know it did, and I'm sorry. I'm also sorry for the way my family treated you at my birthday party. Richard's comment was cruel, and Michael's response was worse. You deserve to be defended, not mocked." We talked for nearly an hour, and while I remained cautious about trusting her sudden change of heart, I was encouraged by her apparent willingness to examine her own behavior. "Would you be willing to have lunch with me sometime?" she asked near the end of our conversation. "Not to ask for anything, just to talk. I'd like to get to know you better as a person, rather than just my mother-in-law." I agreed to consider it, which felt like a reasonable compromise between forgiveness and caution. Spring brought more positive changes. Michael's job was going well, and he seemed happier than he had been in years. Our phone conversations became more frequent and natural, and he started visiting me occasionally just to spend time together. During one visit, he brought photo albums from his childhood that Emily had found while organizing their closet. "I forgot how much fun we used to have," he said, looking at pictures of birthday parties and school events and quiet evenings at home. "You made everything special, even when we didn't have much money." "We had what mattered," I said. "We had love and time and attention for each other." "I want my kids to have that," Michael said. "Not just expensive things, but real connection with family." In May, I finally agreed to have lunch with Emily. I chose the same cafe where Michael and I had our breakthrough conversation. Neutral territory where we could talk honestly without the pressure of being in either of our homes. Emily looked different than I remembered. Less polished, more relaxed. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse instead of her usual designer outfit, and her hair was styled casually instead of professionally. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said when she sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But Michael seems to think you're genuinely working to change things." "I am," Emily said. "It's harder than I expected, examining my own behavior and admitting how wrong I've been. But it's also been liberating in a way." She told me about her therapy sessions, her conversations with Patricia about respect and family dynamics, and her growing understanding of how financial dependence had corrupted her relationships with both me and her own parents. "I never learned to solve problems without money," she said. "When Michael lost his job, my first instinct was to find someone else to pay our bills instead of figuring out how to live within our reduced income." "And now?" I asked. "Now we're learning to live on what we actually make," she said. "It's been an adjustment, but also a relief. We're not constantly worried about maintaining appearance anymore." We talked about the children, about Michael's new job, about the family counseling they were doing to rebuild trust and communication. Emily seemed genuinely committed to change, though I remained cautiously optimistic rather than fully trusting. "I have a favor to ask," she said near the end of our lunch. Not money, she added quickly when she saw my expression change. Time. Leah has been missing you terribly, and I was wondering if you might be willing to spend an afternoon with her. At the park, or the museum, wherever you'd like to go. The offer was tempting, but I was still wary of getting drawn back into family drama. What would be the conditions? I asked. What would you expect from me? Nothing, Emily said. Just that you spend time with your granddaughter who loves you. No obligations, no expectations beyond being her grandmother. We arranged for me to pick up Leah the following Saturday for an afternoon at the Art Institute. I was nervous about the visit. So much had changed since I had spent significant time with any of my grandchildren, but also excited to see her again. Leah had grown taller in the month since I had seen her regularly, but she was still the same affectionate child I remembered. She hugged me fiercely when I arrived to pick her up and chattered excitedly about everything she wanted to show me at the museum. I learned about Monet in art class, she said as we walked through the galleries. His water lily paintings are here, right? We spent 3 hours wandering through the museum, talking about art and life and school and friends. Leah was curious about everything, asking thoughtful questions and making observations that reminded me why I had always enjoyed her company so much. Grandma, why were you and Mommy and Daddy so mad at each other? She asked as we sat in the museum cafe sharing cookies. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about how to treat each other, I said carefully. But the important thing is that everyone is working to fix the problems now. Are you still going to be my grandma forever? She asked, the same question that had broken my heart months earlier. Yes, sweetheart. Always and forever, no matter what. When I dropped her off at home, Emily came outside to greet us. Did you have fun? She asked Leah. The best time, Leah said. Grandma knows so much about painting, and she bought me a book about art in the gift shop. That sounds wonderful, Emily said, and her smile seemed genuine. Leah, why don't you go inside and show Daddy your book? I want to talk to Grandma for a minute. After Leah ran inside, Emily turned to me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said. She's been so much happier since you two have been talking again. I didn't realize how much she had missed you. I missed her too, I said. All of them. Would you be willing to do this again sometime? Emily asked. Maybe next time with all 3 kids? I considered the invitation carefully. Spending time with my grandchildren was something I wanted desperately. But I also needed to protect myself from falling back into old patterns of exploitation. I'd like that, I said finally. As long as we keep it simple and straightforward, just grandma time, no other expectations or obligations. Absolutely, Emily agreed. No strings attached. Over the next few months, I gradually returned to regular contact with my grandchildren. Once-a-week visits, phone calls when they wanted to talk, involvement in school events and other activities that mattered to them. The relationship felt different than before, healthier, more honest, based on genuine affection rather than obligation or guilt. I no longer felt like I had to buy their love or prove my worth through expensive gifts or financial contributions. Michael and Emily seemed to be doing better as well. They had sold their expensive house in Lincoln Park and moved to a more modest home in a less prestigious neighborhood. The children had to change schools, but they seemed to adjust quickly and were happier with parents who were less stressed about money. Emily and I developed a cautious but increasingly friendly relationship. We had lunch together monthly, and she made genuine efforts to include me in family events as an honored guest rather than a barely tolerated obligation. I owe you an apology for something else, she said during one of our lunches in late summer. I used to be embarrassed by your background, your job, your apartment. I thought having a mother-in-law who wasn't wealthy or sophisticated reflected poorly on me. And now? I asked. Now I think you're one of the strongest people I know, she said. You raised an incredible son mostly on your own, worked multiple jobs to provide for him, and maintained your dignity even when we were treating you terribly. That's something to admire, not hide. Arst! It was the kind of acknowledgement I had waited years to hear, and it felt like genuine recognition rather than empty flattery. By autumn, our family had settled into new routines that worked better for everyone. Michael was happy in his job. Emily had returned to work part-time in a career she enjoyed, rather than one that just paid well, and the children were thriving in their new school and neighborhood. I was volunteering at the Art Institute 3 days a week, and had started taking painting classes myself, something I had dreamed of doing since I was young, but never had the time or money to pursue. My small apartment was filled with my own artwork now, bright canvases that reflected the joy I felt in discovering creative talents I hadn't known I possessed. The financial pressure was completely gone from our relationships. Michael and Emily managed their own expenses. I took care of my own needs, and when we exchanged gifts or shared meals, it was because we wanted to express love rather than because anyone felt obligated to provide or receive support. "You seem different," Mrs. Rodriguez observed during one of our regular coffee dates. "Lighter somehow. More yourself." "I feel like myself," I said. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of trying to earn other people's approval." "And your family, are they treating you better?" "Much better," I said. "Once I stopped allowing them to treat me poorly, they had to figure out how to relate to me as an equal. It took time, but they did figure it out." In December, almost exactly a year after our family crisis had begun, Emily hosted a Christmas party. Not the elaborate, expensive affairs of previous years, but a simple gathering of family and close friends in their new home. This time, when I arrived, I was greeted warmly and introduced with pride rather than embarrassment. "This is Margaret, Michael's mother," Emily said to friends who hadn't met me before. "She's a docent at the Art Institute and an accomplished painter. We're so lucky to have her in our family." No one called me a maid. No one applauded cruel jokes at my expense. Instead, I was treated like a valued family member whose presence was welcomed rather than tolerated. During dinner, Michael stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said. "This year has taught me a lot about what really matters in life. Not how much money you make or what neighborhood you live in, but how you treat the people you love." He looked directly at me. "I especially want to thank my mom, who taught me about strength and perseverance and unconditional love, even when I forgot how to show appreciation for those lessons." The toast was brief but heartfelt, and I felt tears of gratitude rather than pain for the first time in years at a family gathering. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, Leah pulled me aside. "Grandma, I'm so glad you're not mad at us anymore," she said, hugging me tightly. "I was never mad at you, sweetheart," I said. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work through problems, but that doesn't change how much we love each other." "Are you happy now?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? For the first time in years, the answer was genuinely yes. "I am happy," I said. "Very happy." "Good," Leah said with satisfaction. "I like it better when everyone is happy." Driving home that night through the familiar streets of Chicago, I reflected on how much had changed in 12 months. I had gone from being a financially exploited, emotionally abused family member to being a respected and valued person in my own right. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been months of uncertainty, fear of losing my family completely, loneliness as I learned to live independently rather than codependently, but the result was better than I could have imagined. I had my family back, but on terms that honored my dignity rather than exploiting my love. I had discovered talents and interests I never knew I possessed. I had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being generous and being exploited. Most importantly, I had remembered who I was. A strong, capable woman who deserved respect and kindness from the people she loved. As I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, exhausted, financially drained, emotionally depleted, accepting poor treatment because I was afraid of losing the people I loved. That woman had been afraid to set boundaries because she thought love required endless sacrifice. She had confused enabling with helping, martyrdom with motherhood, financial generosity with emotional connection. The woman I was now understood that real love required mutual respect, that healthy families supported each other without exploitation, that saying no to destructive behavior was often the most loving thing you could do. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, an older woman, gray-haired and lined with experience, but with eyes that sparkled with life rather than dull with resignation. This was who I had always been underneath the fear and desperation. This was who I could be when I remembered to value myself as much as I valued others. The next morning, I woke up naturally rather than to an alarm clock, one of the small luxuries of retirement and self-determination. I made myself a proper breakfast and ate it while reading the newspaper, taking time to savor both the food and the quiet. My phone rang as I was finishing my coffee. Michael's name on the caller ID, but this time I answered without anxiety, without wondering what crisis or request might be coming. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice warm and relaxed. "I just wanted to call and see how you're doing this morning." "I'm doing very well," I said, and meant it completely. "How are you?" "Good," he said. "Really good. Emily and I were talking last night about how much we enjoyed having you at the party. The kids are already asking when you're coming, oh."